of all, welcome to today's webinar. And as Renaud said, we're going to talk about defining the value of change management. This is probably one of the things that I find is most fascinating, is how we can define the value of change management and convince other stakeholders of its value. So in today's webinar, we're going to use some interaction. We're going to use Poll Everywhere. You can use your browser where you go into pollev.com/nexum3, or you can also use your smartphone. You can download the Poll Everywhere application, and then you can use that. But I'm going to check in with you a couple of times today to make sure that that you're engaged. And also, I want to hear your perspectives on a number of things. So let me just quickly introduce myself, just so you know who it is that you engage with today. My name is Morten Kamp Andersen. I'm a partner here at Nexum. I'm a master instructor in Prosci training. And one of the things that I do love is to try to put value on things, intangible things, such as change management. Okay, so with that, let us begin. So before we jump into defining the value, I want to set the stage with really just defining what is change management. So we have a shared foundation. Now, I've been using this analogy quite a lot. Change, whether we thought about it or not in the past, always has two sides. There is the technical side where we document and optimize critical processes. But then there's also a people side where our people adhere to and follow the processes or not. We have the technical side where we identify and describe, announce the new mindset. But then we also have a people side where the behaviors show up and how people come to work. And we also have the technical side where we develop and enabling a new technology. And we also have a people side where people adopt and use the new technology or do not. So every time we have a change, there are two sides of the coin. And that really is what we call the unified value proposition. This is one of my favorite slides that I bring when I need to talk about change management. If somebody comes to me and say, you're only allowed to bring one slide, this is the one that I will bring. And this is really saying that whenever we do a change, then it's about leaving what we do and what we know now, how we do things today, navigating some messy transition to arrive at some unknown future that hopefully is going to be better than what we have today. Now, we take on a change for a particular reason. It might be that the organization, it might be a reason from inside the organization or from outside of the organization. It might be alleviating a pain, or it may be seizing an opportunity that we see. It might just be a small pet project, or it might be a huge transformation. But anyway, there is always a reason for change. Then we have the technical side. The technical side is where we design, develop, and deliver the technical solution to meet those opportunities or to alleviate those pains. And the technical side does not mean that it needs to be technological. It really can be anything to do with the change. It can be, if it's a new mindset, then it's defining that new mindset. If it's new job roles, then it's creating those new job roles. And if it's an IT system, it's the IT system itself. But anyway, so there is the technical side. But then there is also a people side. That's where we help our employees engage, adopt, and use the solution to bring it to life when they show up. And it is when both of these, and only when both of these come together, that we deliver a successful change within the organization. So project management is the technical side. It is executing the technical side, and change management is about executing the people side. So with the unified value proposition, we can sort of come to a definition of what change management is. And if we look at it at a project level, it is the application of a structured process with a set of tools for leading the people side of a change to achieve a desired outcome. So there's always a desired outcome, and it's about achieving that. There is, but there is also at the organizational level, this is where it's more a leadership tendency for enabling change within the organization. It is a capability, it's a skill set within the leadership team, so that whenever we set out to do something, we actually do it. Now, so that's just a little bit about what the definition of change management is. And with that, we can go into our agenda for today. So we're going to begin by opening up by looking at the fact that it's not just about defining the value, but it's actually really about gaining commitment to change management. So we're just going to start a little bit about some thoughts about gaining commitment to change management, and who is it that we're going to get commitment from. And then we are going to extend that notion and go into 5 different approaches to see how we can build that commitment. And we're going to look at return on investment for change management. We'll look at cost and risks, probability, and language. And all of this will unfold, and we will give you some tools how to do that. So we titled the webinar correctly, Defining the Value of Change Management. But I really started to explore this a little bit and say, you know, it's more than just defining. There is actually a contextualizing component here, where we show the value of change management and how it lives in something bigger. So the bigger picture of the organization and the initiative that are underway. So we're contextualizing change management and the value of change management. There's also really an element of positioning the value of change management. So connecting it to the pains and to the gains that we are looking for, and how we can support our leaders and the organization. So it's also positioning change management and the value of that. And because in the end, there is a selling component here, that we're selling change management. We're looking for people in the organization to make an investment in time, investment in mind share, resources, capital, to make this change come to life. And to invest in being intentional also means that we need to sort of review the value of change management, revealing the value of change management. So many of our senior leaders, project leaders, people managers, and so on, they have lived the consequences of poor change management in the past. They've been the victim of changes that was not well implemented. We all have, frankly, and they are probably been along on changes where good change management was done. So we're going to help them identify the critical connection between being intentional and helping our people forward to achieve those outcomes. So it's revealing that. And that takes us to the last, which really is personalizing that case, that in the end, our compelling case needs to be relevant, but it also needs to speak to each of our stakeholders. So as we unpack these different approaches for defining the value, I want you to be thinking about, who is it that I am defining this value for? Because then we make sure that we unpack that before we shift gears. I'll just start with a couple of quotes. This is one of my favorite one. The first one is, "An ounce of context is worth a pound of isolated facts." And this is our tendency, especially when we're trying to define the value, that what we do, I think it's a little bit hard for people to wrap their heads around and do this right. So what we often do is we go right to the isolated facts. And I'm going to charge you with ensuring that when you do enter and walk through that door, you're bringing an ounce of context and for what is going to make this project a success. So success in terms of organizational success, that's the context that we want to bring in to this conversation. Second quote is from Ted Levitt. He said, "People don't buy a quarter-inch drill, they buy a quarter-inch hole." You got to study the hole, not the drill. The drill is just the solution for it. So we need to understand the pains and the gains of the person that we're talking with to bring change management into the mix. So we can show that change management is that best supporting actor to the best actor award that goes for what it is that we're trying to set out to achieve. So again, they don't buy the drill, they buy the whole. So you need to understand what are the pains, what is the stakeholders' whole, so to speak, that you need to speak into. The final quote I just want to bring in here is from Simon Sinek. He gives us a little bit twist here, which is that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So when we do change management, we're going to do a lot of stakeholder analysis and resistance identification and communication and planning and sponsoring and coaching, and all of that is the work that you do. But Sinek is really telling us here that you need that people buy why you do it, not what it is that you do. And the why we do it, why we do change management, is that when we treat our people right, when we do it the right way, then we are more successful with our projects. And that's why we do it. So we should walk away. We shouldn't talk so much about what it is we're doing, but why it is that we're doing it. So if I'm going to enlist them, how does change management, how can change management help them succeed in their job and with their aspirations? So we have 4 different stakeholders here that you might want to convince about the value of change management. So I'm going to give you some high level of what it is and what the goal and what the aspiration is. So our sponsor, Lainey, her aspiration is, I want this initiative and my investment in it to deliver the results that I expected in order to help move our organization towards who we want to become. So that's what I sponsor, Lainey. That's my goal. That's my aspiration. So how are you as a change manager going to help me with that? That's how we personalize the messages from our people. Now, if we look at the people managers, Lee here, in reality, this is about, I want my people to be successful in their jobs, as people outside of work, and with this, bringing this initiative to fruition in their day-to-day work. So Lee is interested in their people and in making them a success and making them happy in and outside of work. Now, again, how can you, as a change manager, how will you help Lee making sure that her employees are successful and happy in their job? Aisha, which is the project manager, they have different concerns. They're managing the triple constraints of cost and scope and schedule, and saying, how do I land this project, this change, to bring the most valuable as possible? Because that's important. So understanding that I have these constraints at play, and that ultimately, as a change management practitioner, we want to make sure that we are partnering with that project manager, because we both have, a big part in landing this change to give the most value to the organization. But our project manager has slightly different perspectives, slightly different constraints, and we need to talk into those constraints and those concerns and those pains, and to answer the question, how can we help her make sure that she will be a success as a project manager? And then we have Jamal, our change partner. He might be out of HR or OD or business analyst, or he's maybe a Six Sigma specialist or something. He may have very different backgrounds. But Jamal brings a particular expertise and experience in helping us solve this problem and seize this opportunity in front of us, which means, how can we together all partner and drive this change, this initiative? How can we make this a success? So those are the 4 people that we might want to try to convince. Now, I want to engage you first. I want to ask you the first question today. I just want to hear from you. You're about 100 people here. I want to hear, how often do you have to sell change management to sponsors? So So go into PolyV at Nexum, Nexum 3. You can go into your browser, or you can go in via your phone and type in polyv.com/Nexum3. Okay, so how often are you having to sell change management to sponsors? Now, some of you are saying always. I will not go on a project without having to sell to sponsors. I can see half of you are saying very often. And that means that you need to either convince that change management is even necessary, or you need to convince those people that change management is that you need budget for, or you need resources for, you need attention from the sponsors to why they should engage. So actually, more than 80% of you are saying that it's either very often or always. Okay, so the sponsor is a very important one. Okay, let's move on to the next person, and this is how often are you having to sell change management to people managers? So go into polyv.com. Maybe you need to refresh in order to clear the responses. So here you have people managers. Now the people managers are obviously incredibly busy. They have almost no time. So you need to convince them to engage and take on the role as change managers. So to do something active to make this project work. Okay, so I can see that 50% of you are saying very often, 25% of you are saying always, and around 22% are saying sometimes. Okay, interesting. And the final one is, I just want to ask you is, how often do you need to sell change management to project managers? So obviously we have a good idea that that project management and change management are actually complementary disciplines, that we help each other. So if we do project management well, it is easier to do change management. And if we do change management well, you're also likely to succeed with project management. And it is the combined effort. Remember, that's from the unified value proposition. It's a combined effort that will make sure that we succeed. And I can see that it is fewer people here who say always. 47% say very often, but actually 25% of you are saying rarely. So it's a little bit less selling to project managers and a lot more to sponsors, I hear. Okay, so thanks a lot for engaging with that. There'll be coming other things that we will go through. So here's some things that start to think about as I am personalizing my value definition of change management, my value proposition. How can change management help them succeed in their job? So what is it that helps these groups up at night? What are they worried about? What gets them up in the morning? What are they excited about? What are their aspirations to, and what inspires them? So both of those are going to be anchors we need to keep in mind in order to make a compelling case for change management. But also, what value do they find success? I mean, how do they define success, both at a professional level and a personal level? Because we want to help them be successful, and making them more successful at what they want to deliver is how we position change management effectively with them. So if you understand how do they define success, then you're more likely to be able to position change management well with them. One of our clients, CEO there, used the analogy that change management is like the water on the water slide. So the water slide is the initiative. The initiative is going to happen, and you can go down that water slide with no water, but we know the consequence of that. So if you're already going to get to the bottom of the slide, how we're going to get there change management can help you get there more quickly or more effectively or with less bumps and bruises along the way than otherwise would have been. So we are going to go down that water slide, but whether there are water on it or not, it's going to make a big difference in terms of how it's going to get there. And finally, what are their past experience with change management? What are their current objections? Have they already tried projects where there've been change management, but it hasn't worked out well? Have they had good experiences with change management? And obviously that matters a lot, because if you know some of the objections already, you can also position your speak about the value of change management to mitigate some of those objections already. Okay, so from a contextual point of view, this notion of defining the value of change management to get sufficient buy-in and commitment, that level of conviction is what we need. So when we think about it, with the Prosci methodology structure, this is really referred to, I don't know how many of you have been on the 3-day course already, but for those of you who have, and especially recently, you will recognize the role roster activation. And this is the part where we talk about that. So that's where we engage all of the key actors of a successful change within and throughout the organization and help them step up through awareness of the need to fulfill their role and the desire to participate, and support their role when they're stepping into driving more successful change with this. So understand what it is that where they are, how they define success, what keeps them up at night, can help you build awareness and desire for participating and fulfilling their role in terms of change success. So that's where we get an anchor into methodology. I'll leave you with this before we step into our 5 approaches. That's that priority is a function of context. This is a quote from Stephen Covey, the late Stephen Covey. And if we want to get priority for change management, we need to define its value within a compelling context. And that context is how that stakeholder defines success. And it is where they are charged with the change that they immediately are dealing with, and where we're concerned with the people side. And so we know that they are compelled with and addressing this issue. So we need to understand what they are concerned about so we can put it into that context, because priority is a function of context. Right. So that's going to pivot back into our second half, which is the 5 approaches to defining the value of change management. And I have 5 of them here, and we are going to lead with the value statement, and then we're going to unpack it, and then I'll tee you up with a question that you can use to operationalize that approach in your work. So here's our 5 value statements for change management. The value of change management is accelerating and delivering that people-dependent portion of project ROI or value. It's number 2, it's improving how quickly, how many, how effectively people adopt the solution. Those are both upsides, but the third one is a bit of a downside, because also the value of change management is also reducing the cost and the risk of poor adoption and usage, like resistance and conflicts and frustrations, things we know that plague organizations, and especially today, frankly. The fourth one is that change management is increasing the likelihood of meeting project objectives on time and on budget. And then my last one here is that this is best served with served in your audience language. So again, we're talking about different audiences. We talked about these 4 different archetypes that we talked about. They will have different languages. So it is best served in the audience language. So we're going to pick up each of these 5 in turn and equip you with questions that you can use to operationalize this. Now, the thinking. So the first one is really accelerating. So going back here, the first one is really accelerating the value and delivering the people-dependent portion of project ROI. And this thinking really began to emerge over the years when we asked the question, which is, what is the ROI of change management? And when we started to ask that question, we really asked it as if it was something that was separate from the ROI of the project. But then we say, no, 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 that's really not what it's about. And the Venn diagrams are really one another of the same, right? They're part of the same diagram. So there is a project and there is a value that we are hoping to get out of this project, which could be a new CRM system or new electronic health records or this merger or this acquisition or whatever it is. So a portion of that value depends on people changing how they do the job. So the project has an ROI, and a portion of that is related to people changing behavior. Now, some projects, let's say we're renegotiating the financial terms of the lease of our building, right? There is no dependence on how people do their job when we're renegotiating financial terms. So we will actually get all of the project benefits, the ROI, all of it we will get without people changing behavior. So 0% of that ROI is dependent on people changing behavior. But as we move to the right here and move along on the spectrum, more and more of the value is tied up in depending on people adapting and using the change. And these are also, frankly, the more strategic and more important changes that happens to be on the far right of the corner. And when we do the 3-day certification course, we actually ask the participants to identify how big a portion of your project, how big a portion is related to people changing behavior. And frankly, most of the time, the answers lie between 75 to 100% on that. So the bigger the projects, the more strategic they are, the more we tend to be to the right. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question right now. And again, this is on polyv.com at Nexum. And just type a number that is rounded to the nearest 0. So it could be 50 or 55 or 70 or 75 or 90. So think about a project that you are working on right now or that you have good knowledge about. What percentage of the total project ROI is dependent on people adopting adopting the system, of adopting and changing behavior? So we're trying to get out of the investment, time and effort and resources. How much of that is getting? So 90, 80, 75, it's very high numbers and very usual that I see this. It's very few projects other than changing the financial lease where it's 0%. There is always somebody who needs to show up differently. And the bigger the projects, the more a big transformation, almost 100% of that. Sometimes we save a little bit on changing IT costs and so on, but many times it is 100. I see a lot of hundreds coming up on the screen right now. 85, 100. Perfect. I see very high numbers, very high numbers. Okay, 80, 90. Thanks a lot for chipping in. So as you can see, obviously, you can have that conversation about the value of change management, because if a large portion of the return on investment is coming from people changing behavior, well, then we need to do something about it. Okay, so we actually took this a step further, well, actually a big step further, and build out a full-on ROI calculator tool. And I'm going to build this for you at a pretty high level so you can kind of see the thinking and the mechanics. So first, we began by defining what are the organizational benefits and project objectives, right? So I'm going to share, we're going to take an example. It's a case study about rolling out electronic health records at a hospital. So what are the benefits? What are the objectives? So we get a really crisp and clear identification of what it is that we're setting out to achieve. So we have organizational benefits and we have project objectives. Now, the second question we ask is, what is the relative contribution of each of these benefits and objectives? And we're not stack ranking them here from 1 to 10, from the most important to the least important. We're giving each of them an index score. So some of them are more important, and we give them, the 8s and the 9s and the 10s and so on. And some of them are less important, and we give them, the 1s and the 2s and the 3s. So for each of the objective, the organizational benefits and the project objectives, we go in and give them a score in terms of what is the relative contribution of each of these benefits to the total score. Then we ask us the question, which is qualitatively, how much depends on adoption and usage? Is it all of it? Is it high, medium, low? Is it none of it? So kind of the percentages that you gave before, but in a qualitatively way. So is it all of it? So for instance, with the patient throughput and experience, which had a relatively high contribution, we could see that all of it really depends on adoption and usage, whereas lower cost and higher revenue organizational benefits, it's a low in terms of people changing behavior. So we can go through each of them and just type high, low, medium, etc. Right. And then we entertain what we call sort of the counter-nil hypothesis, and then we basically, in a quantitative way, how much of the benefits do we get if no one uses the change? So if no one uses this change, percentage-wise, if nobody gets it, how much would we get? So the patient throughput and experience, we will get nothing if people do not change behavior, if people do not use the change. Anyway, so basically, sometimes we do get some benefits. We also get that with the 75 in the lower cost and higher revenue. Sometimes we might get some cost savings out of the systems or license or warranty cost and so on. But in terms of the other upsides, depends on people engaging and adopting and using the change. So that's how we start to build out this sort of true calculation for the number that we just estimated. And that leads us to the sort of key question, which is, for your project, what percentage of overall results and outcomes depends on people using the change? So that's the question. That's the percentages that you gave before. This slide is really just going through it and estimating each of the benefits and arriving at an overall number. So the gut feel number that you just gave me was essentially a result of all of the organizational benefits and the project objectives. So, and I'll tell you that the estimation that you gave and shown here actually is often enough just to get people moving in the right direction. Adoption and usage is actually really important. It is a big portion of our total ROI. And that leads us to the second question. If that's how much it depends on adoption and usage, how much are we investing? And investing can be in how much time are we spending on our steering group meetings, how much budget have we allocated, how many people have we, how much do I know about it, how much energy are we investing in this, in driving and supporting the people adoption. And obviously that number may be much lower, and sometimes a much lower is enough to support the adoption and usage of the people, but many times it's not. So if it's 3% and 70% of our benefits relies on people changing behavior, is that enough? Are we spending enough of our time on the steering committee talking about, asking for, being interested in? Am I spending enough time as me as a sponsor in terms of making sure this happens? Have I dedicated enough resource to this project to make sure that we get those 70%? So that basically that's where the cognitive dissonance brings value into this conversation is, we're not spending enough time on it, but it's actually relying on people adoption and usage. So I think this is a really, really good way of having that initial conversation. So the questions for the first is, for our project, what are the expected results and outcomes that we're looking for? And the second question, what percentage of those results and outcomes depends on people changing how they do the jobs? So these are the two questions that I'm equipping you with to bring change management return on investment into your tool to when you're defining the value of change management. So that was the first one. The second perspective we're going to tackle is that the value of change management is improving how quickly, how many, and how effectively people adopt the solution. I'm going to begin with a quote from the legendary Vince Lombardi. He said that the achievement of an organization are the results of the combined effort of each individual. Now, he was talking about an American football team, I know that, but the same actually holds true for our big projects and our initiatives in organization. That the achievement of the benefit of this initiative are the result of the combined effort of each individual who will be impacted by this initiative. So let me give you a little visualization. This is a very clean presentation. It's not necessarily realistic, but it's a clean presentation of stepping out of a current state through a transition state to arrive at a future state. And if we do that at a certain level of success, we'll get a certain level of success out of this change. However, if we don't tend to those individuals that collectively are resulting in the outcome that we're trying to achieve, what can happen then? Well, as we step out of the current state, what happens in the transition state? Well, it takes a lot longer than we expected, and it's going to be a bumpy ride, right? So that bumpy ride, that bumpy transition has cost and consequences on budget and on scope and on outcomes. Now, you might end up getting what we call a future state. We call it sort of the Swiss cheese future state, which basically means that some people have opted out of this change, leaves us with holes and not with the future state that we expected. And when that happens, we're essentially getting a ROI or success that is much lower than what we expected. And here's how we went about capturing this. Now, there are three human factors that determine return on investment on a project. Now, the first factor is called speed of adoption, which is how quickly, so when the boat pulls up, how quickly do people get on the boat, especially relatively how quickly we thought they were going to get on the boat. Ultimate utilization is how many people will end up on the boat. So how many people are doing their jobs in the new ways, using the new processes, new tools, new systems in the way that it was envisaged, so we can collectively achieve the outcomes of the projects. And finally, we have proficiency, which is once they are on the boat, are they delivering on what we expected? So when we're going to use these 15 functions to achieve this better solution, how many of these functions and how well are they using these functions? And so we can capture the benefits that we expected. So overall, we have the speed of adoption, how quickly do people get on board, ultimate utilization, how many will ultimately use the new system, and proficiency, how well will people use it. So I will engage with you again, ask you a question, grab your browsers or your smartphones. Have you seen any of the sub ROI factors, speed of adoption, ultimate utilization, proficiency? Have you seen any of them impact your project? So have you seen that people got on board a little later than you expected, or when they started to use the system or the new processes or new tools, they didn't quite use it as you expected. They didn't quite use all of the buttons, or they didn't quite fill out all of the things, which meant that you didn't quite get all of the benefits. Or was there some people who in the end never used this system? They just did some workarounds. Maybe there was a whole division where they said, well, we're just not going to get on board on this one because frankly, we're going to do it our way. So many of you are typing in very often. Always 25%, and only 6 of you are saying rarely. And I really would like to know who you are rarely, because I would like to know what you're doing well, because I definitely see it often on the projects that I see or my colleagues are involved in. But anyway, but I can see that for many of you, 75, 80%, it is something that you very often or always encounter. Thanks a lot for engaging. I really, really appreciate that. So we took that a couple of steps further and did some revenue modeling and cost saving. And those of you who know me well will know I love numbers, and I love, trying to put things into value, and cash flow diagrams is something I love. Now, this is a cash flow diagram where you would say, well, what if I look at it from a cash flow point of view? The speed of adoption is basically how quickly do people get on board and bring the change to life. So this is the slope of the height of the bars. Ultimate utilization shows, how in the end how many people will actually show up, and then we have the proficiency, which shows the height of each of the bars. Now, where it gets really interesting is that we can start to map what happens. So what happens if we are slow in getting out of the gate and the speed of adoption takes 3 months more than we expected? And because of some mishaps, maybe too many other priorities and conflicting issues, we ended up not getting the ultimate utilization rate that we expected. So with that, we can start to mirror financial impact of the human factors into the return of the project. Now, it is not all projects that have explicitly a return on investment chart like this or have a cash flow diagram. But most projects in their business plan do have implicit a business plan, which is that they have a period which is defined as this is where we make the investment and the project will cost so and so much. And then we have a period of profit of benefit realization where we're hoping to gain some benefits. And many times that's also defined. So you can actually, from the business case, many times make a case like this. So here's the 2 questions for speed of adoption, ultimate utilization, and proficiency. So how would we define speed of adoption, ultimate utilization, and proficiency from the people side perspective? And the second question, what assumptions have we made about how quickly, how many, and how effectively people will adopt? Because I'll tell you, a lot of times when we're not thinking about these human factors, the assumptions get pretty aggressive. I mean, that the speed of adoption was instantaneously. So as we go live, everybody will use it from day one, flip of the switch, ultimate utilization is 100%, and that people were really, really good from day one in using it. Now, if that happens, we start to capture the benefits, and that's in the business case. But let's add a dose of reality and see how long time will it take before people will really engage with this. Okay, this is our second. That was our second. The third is change management is reducing the cost and the risk of poor adoption. And here's going to be a lot of examples and costs and risks of poor adoption and usage of the solution. So we find that there are both costs and risks at various levels within the organization. So individual costs and risks will be things like frustration, stress, fatigue, confusion, lack of clarity, lack of capacity to focus on business basics, and so on. And those are just start to, and people will then start to feel alienated or disengaged and so on. And all of those individual consequences emerge when they leave the people side of change to chance, right? When we don't focus on this. We know the flip side is true when we are thoughtful about preparing, equipping, supporting our people. Then we don't experience these costs and these risks at an individual level. So here we're documenting them, exposing them as costs and as risk, and say, are we willing to absorb them if we leave the people side of change to chance? Now, we also know at project and initiative level also have costs and risks, delayed timelines, missed milestones, lack of information sharing, a lack of priority, lack of mind share. So sometimes we see a complete coalition of initiatives. And these are real costs and risks when we're not thinking about the people side and the adoption and the usage of the solution as we bring it to life. And then the last is the organizational level, a systemic systemic failure, a real morale impact. You know, that employee experience at the organizational level. Those are all things that are starting to impact when we leave, again, the people side of the change to chance and trust and hope instead of dealing with it. So this is in your slide deck already when you get this out, so I won't go through this, but this is a laundry list of these costs and risks that we've been able to source from our practitioners through the years in sessions just like the ones that you're participating in right now. Now we have, you know, attrition or delays or loss of productivities or no results or resistance or skepticism. There are a lot here, and I'm sure that you will recognize many of them as you go through this. It's interesting. One of them is the idea that is derived, is a derivative of return on investment. This came from one of Prosci's master instructors, J.J. Johnson. And he said that everybody talks about return on investment as the ROI. But there is another ROI, which is the risk of indifference. So frustration, fatigue, failure, all of those things that we just identified when we ignore the people side of change. So there is a risk of indifference, another ROI, if I'm not paying attention to both sides of the successful change coin. On the right-hand side, you see those two incredibly costly letters, R and E: rework, redesign, redo, rescope, retrain, retreat. These are all costs that we can avoid and mitigate by bringing adoption and usage to the table at the very beginning of the initiative. And that's the value of change management. So for our change, what are the biggest costs and risks to the project if people do not effectively adopt and use the solution? So that's the way we would frame this. So what are the biggest costs for your particular change if you don't use change management? All right, that's going to take us to the fourth, that the value of change management is increasing the likelihood of meeting project objectives on time and on budget. And what we'll find here is some data correlation. There are probably 5,000-6,000 data points in this data set now. And basically, how well did we bring our people along on the change journey? How well did we prepare, equip, and support our people? Did we answer the why? Why now? What if we don't? Were our sponsors active and visible? How effectively did we manage the people side of change? And did the project meet project objectives? Did we do it? Did we manage it on time, and did we manage it on budget? And you can see that we get a threefold bump when we go from poor change management to fair change management, and a sixfold bump when you go from poor to excellent in terms of likelihood of meeting project objectives that we set out to achieve. Now, the interesting thing is, if you peel back the correlation, you see that there is a direct connection between bringing your people along and being able to do it on time and on budget. And because I think there is this kind of knee-jerk reaction that, you know, the people side of change, that all sounds good and important and all of that, but it's going to slow me down. It's going to take more time. It's going to make me miss my budget. Well, and I can understand that kind of initial reaction because it feels like we're going to spend more time and effort on this. But remember the two costly letters R and E. Now, what we actually see is that we see in our data that if we do change management, we actually do it faster and we actually do it below budget because we don't have these R and E costs associated. So for our change, what is the value? What is it worth for us to increase the likelihood of meeting project objectives, to be on time and to be on budget? How important is this change? How important is it to achieve what we set out to do? We need to do it on time. We need to do it on budget. And if so, the value of change management is helping us increase the likelihood of the things that we set out to do. Right. And that takes us to the fifth. I know I'm going a bit fast here, but I really want to have the time to just answer a couple of your questions. So that takes us to the fifth element here. And that is that the value of change management is best served in your audience languages. So we begin with another quote. This is from Nelson Mandela. He said, "If you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart." So when we begin talking about the value of change management, the words that we choose, the words that we use are critically important. Jeff Hyatt, who was the founder of Prosci and the creator of the ADKAR model, he once said, "Executive speaks three languages: finance, finance, and finance." Now, I'll probably add that they also speak some other languages as well. Strategy execution, stepping into who we decide that we want to become, competitive advantage. How do we stay out in front of with our core competency? What is it that makes us unique, who we are? And also, they're also interested in their own legacy and what they're achieving. So our job is to speak in their language. For speaking to executives, we must obviously speak the language of finance and strategy execution. If we're speaking to people managers, maybe we are more speaking the language of your people's well-being and their success. So again, think a little bit about who is it that you need to speak to about the value of change management? Who is it that you need to sell change management to? Whose context is it that you're speaking into? So we are adapting our language. And we're so familiar with talking about communications and trainings and stakeholders and resistance and resilience and assessments and all of that, because that's the work we do. That's the work we are executing. But if we want to be compelling and relevant when we're defining the value of change management, we need to go and talk a little bit about return on investment, benefit realization. Remember, this is going away from talking about the drill to talking about the whole. Not what are we doing, but what are we delivering and why? So I just want your help here. I want to hear from you which words as a group, and we'll just take these two polls. Which words will you stop using when you're describing the value of change management? So in the past, when you've talked with sponsors or people managers or project managers, what have you been using that you will stop using in the future as we're moving a little bit away from what we do to the benefits of what we do? Pitfalls, yeah, that's a good one. Playbook, yes, I've used that one a lot. Let me show you my playbook. Are we doing this? Training, yes. Stakeholder management. So many of these things are activities that we do, or it is things that we have that we want to show them. Look, we have a stakeholder analysis here, or we have a playbook that we're going to go by, or look at the methodology that I'm going to apply to this, or the money that we're going to spend. Okay, so these are definitely words that your stakeholders may understand. They will understand this when you talk about it, but it's actually not their language. Okay, great. So I'll just move on to the next one, which is which words will you start to use now as you are talking about the describing the value of change management? Which words will you start to describe now in terms of describing the value of change management? Reason why, yes, perfect. So talk a little bit more about benefit realization, yes, solutions, and also maybe what the solution is going to bring benefits. I like you writing benefits here. Intentional, yes. Meaningful, especially for many people managers. They would like for something to be meaningful, so they can communicate that and they know that it will be meaningful for their direct reports. Okay, perfect. Why? Yes, I love that it is being in capital. Thanks. So I will move. So the language. So the question that you're going to take away here is that the specific words that I'm going to start or stop using, both in general, but also in this particular conversation that I'm stepping into with this particular stakeholder, which words will I start to use and which one will I stop using? So this slide is really sort of the price of admission slide. These are the 5 different technique approaches for defining the value of change management. We have our definition statement, and then we have a good number of those questions that we're going to start to be able to use to equip ourselves for stepping into this space. And it's really about getting to the head nod and basically getting past this. So that was our agenda for today. We talked about, defining change management and getting commitment to change management, and that we have different stakeholders and how you talk to them and what success looks like, how you're stepping into that conversation depends a lot on who it is that you're speaking with. And then the 5 approaches to defining the value of change management. So thanks a lot for your time. We still have a couple of questions. Are there any questions coming in?
Yes. Do you hear me now?
Yes, I do.
Oh, fantastic. Yes, we have a question about a particular case. The question is, how do we handle the decision makers when they refuse to invest in change?
Sorry, Renaud, I'm struggling to hear you. You need to maybe put the microphone a little bit higher. Yeah.
Okay, do you hear me again or not?
Slightly, yes.
Slightly?
Yes.
Okay. So the question is that how do you handle when a decision maker refuses to invest in change management, stating that people are forced to change anyhow? For example, you remove an existing system, you replace it.
Yes.
How do you handle such case?
Yes. So that's actually a really good question, because sometimes we hear, well, we're terminating the old system, so they have to use the new system. So why do we need to spend time on trying to get them to understand the why and motivate them and so on? We're just switching it off. And my answer to that is really, you will be surprised how many workarounds people can do not to use the system or to use it poorly. So I had a situation with a client where they were moving into a new, it was an HR master data system that was used for the performance conversations. And basically, you were going to type in information there. The old system was shut off, so now you had to use this. But people were using the new system so poorly, and there was so much resistance against it. So basically, there was a consensus between the employee and their direct manager that, fill it out or just don't do it, or don't do it well, I don't care. So the data that they had from the performance management system basically was so poor that it could not be used. So it might be that the old system is shut off and new one is existing, but if people are not using it right, so this is, remember the 3 human factors, the speed of adoption, ultimate utilization, and proficiency. This is really about proficiency. So if people are not using it well, or might even use it very poorly, and sometimes on purpose, sometimes because training was not well, sometimes because the change management part was not well, then you're not getting the benefits out of the new system. So I will definitely say that, don't be surprised about the poor quality of use of a system, how much that can impact the benefit realization of a project. That would be my answer.
Okay, and then we have another question about could we have an example for how we calculate the leverage from high proficiency?
Yeah, so this was actually an example of high proficiency, and proficiency means that you're using the tool in the way it was intended. So, for instance, we at our company, we have started to move, we have started to use Microsoft Teams. And one of the reasons why we wanted to use Microsoft Teams was that we wanted to move all of our internal conversations into Microsoft Teams, so we had it in one place, and that would give ground for better for better communication and better collaboration. Now, as we are a year later, still many people write emails to each other. A lot of the conversation between our employees are not done in Teams. So is the project successful? Well, yes, the Microsoft Teams was installed. Is speed of adoption? Well, everybody's using Teams. Ultimate utilization? Well, everybody is actually using it right now. But proficiency, people are not using it as well as we had hoped for. And therefore, we're not getting the benefits out of Teams as we had hoped for. So people can get on board, everybody can get on board, but not using it well will have a major impact on the benefits that you set out to achieve.
Okay, thank you, Martin. I think that it's already 2:02, so maybe it's time to say goodbye to our participants and to thank you very much for the presentation. For you, Martin, lots of positive feedback again for your presentation. Thank you very much. For you, dear guest, if you have some questions that are unanswered, if you want to ask additional questions after this session, please feel free to send them over to me by email, for example, or through LinkedIn, for instance. Feel free to do that. Please note that the webinar recording and the slides will be made available as from tomorrow on our website on www.nexum.eu/webinars, and feel free to share it with colleagues. They are really freely available. And for those who are willing to go deeper into the topic, please visit our blog. There is a lot of interesting information to go deeper into the topic. And if you want to be kept up to date about our next programs, do register to a newsletter on the website or follow us on LinkedIn. We announce our different events and the webinars in particular on those channels. And please finally note that the next of our next webinars, the next one will take place on the 9th of September. So it's already within about 10 days, and we will focus on the topic of change management in agile environment. This webinar will explain the key principles of adapting your change management practice to this highly dynamic work environment. I only have to say one thing, it's just to say thank you, and hopefully have a good end of the day, and see you very soon in one of our next webinars. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, and thank you from me as well. I really appreciate you joining. Thank you, and see you next time.